The History of Poland podcast, episode 36, Spindleshanks. Hello and welcome back. Last time we left off with the death of Mieszko the Old. That old rascal had finally gained the upper hand in domestic Polish politics, was in charge of the state as a whole, and then proceeded to die immediately thereafter. While he might have wished that his son Władysław, known to us as Władysław Spindleshanks, would take his place, some other people had other ideas. Specifically, they wished for Leszek the White to become the Grand Duke. Well, let's dive right into the thick of the action in the year 1203. Jan Długosz tells us that, quote, Bishop Fulko and Voivode Nicholas summon another general assembly to elect a successor to the now vacant throne in Krakow. Most people favor Leszek, both because of his father's services to the country and because of what they know of his character. But there is one dissenting voice, that of Voivode Nicholas, who feels that it is degrading to be subject to a prince whose actions are determined by a giddy woman, meaning Princess Helena, against whom the voivode bears a grudge for agreeing to his exile in the previous year. The others find this objection baseless. There is, however, a more serious obstacle, in that the two voivodes of Krakow and Sandomierz openly dislike each other so much that they seem out for each other's blood, and can scarcely be expected to work together. The voivode of Sandomierz, Govorek, whom Leszek recalled from voluntary exile when Mieszko assumed the throne in Krakow, is held in considerable respect by Leszek and the lords of Sandomierz. In the end, after much discussion, the assembly agrees to elect Leszek the White, provided he banishes Govorek from his presence and dispenses with his services. Leszek does not know what to do. Obviously, someone must take up the reins of government in the principality, and so avoid the crop of squabbles and wars that might result if there was no one in authority. Yet neither he nor anyone else wishes to see an innocent man exiled. When Leszek and the council are unable to reach a decision, Govorek, wishing to cut the Gordian knot, tells them that it would be insufferable if the public good were to be neglected solely because of him, who might quit this world any day, or that Leszek should lose his inheritance just because of him. In all that man does, he says, the best thing is to put public interest before private interest. No loyal servant or knight should fear a chivalrous death earned in a just cause defending his prince and lord. How much greater respect will he, Govorek, earn if he goes voluntarily into unjust exile in order to allow his prince to rule? Leszek is deeply moved by Govorek's offer, but refuses to accept the principality and monarchy on such terms. End quote. So that's an unexpected twist right there. Leszek is offered the throne at the ripe age of 22, instead of Władysław Spindleshanks being offered at the ripe age of 45, but only on the condition that he fire one of his chief counselors and allies. But even after that chief counselor offers to resign, Leszek holds up his figurative hand, says, "Everybody slow your roll," and tells them that he's not going to become monarch under any conditions. The people say, okay, then you're not in charge. But somebody does have to be in charge. Długosz tells us what happens next, saying, quote, Another assembly now has to be convened in order to decide what is to be done. Most are in favor of exiling Govorek and electing Leszek. Yet Voivode Nicholas and his brother, and the other members of the family who make up the Old Guard, and who, like a team of oxen pull in whatever direction Nicholas wishes, dig in their heels, and in the end, Władysław, Duke of Poznan, is chosen. Emissaries are sent to urge him to come to Krakow as speedily as possible to take over the principality to which he has a dual title, by right of inheritance from his father and by his recent election. Władysław, however, knowing that the Krakowians originally chose Leszek, hesitates to accept, for he remembers the wars fought by his father and his uncle. When the emissaries insist that Leszek has refused his election, Władysław, wishing to avoid becoming involved in a civil war, sends to Leszek asking whether he is accepting or refusing his election. For, although Władysław has as good a right to the throne as Leszek has, he will not oppose the latter's election if he wishes to accept. Leszek replies, against the advice of his counselors, that he refused his election because of the condition requiring the exile of the voivode of Sandomierz, and that, if this remains a condition, he will not accept election. Władysław, he says, is to do what is best for him and the country, and neither he nor his brother Conrad will put obstacles in his way. This reply, given more out of youthful enthusiasm than mature consideration, causes many of the clergy and laity to lament the exclusion of the family of Casimir from its rightful succession to the throne and monarchy. Władysław, informed of Leszek's decision, seeks and obtains the support of the Dukes of Opole and Ratibórz, as well as of Henry of Wrocław. Not that he thinks their support will be of much benefit to him, but he wishes to avoid their envy. These arrangements made, he goes to Kraków, where one and all receive him as their monarch. Once enthroned, he behaves with the most admirable benevolence and mercy to all. One and all have easy access to him. His judgments are objective, he protects the weak from being wronged, and grants requests that are genuine and justified. All his revenue he distributes with unheard-of generosity among the knights. Nature has equipped him with unusual good looks and courage, but his looks are spoiled by long spindly legs, which have earned him the nickname of Longshanks. End quote. So that sounds very promising. So promising that when I first learned of these events, I naively thought to myself, well, this might be a new era of peace and cooperation in Poland. Clearly Leszek isn't impatient to be in charge, Mr. Longlegs over here doesn't seem as bad as his dear old dad was, and people seem to be content with the direction of the country. If there was Gallup polling at the time, I bet the approval ratings would be pretty high. But things wouldn't remain well for long. No, because now that Leszek is out of power, he is easy prey. The first trouble comes from Roman the Great, the Grand Duke of Kiev. Roman had been loyal to Leszek while he was in power, but now that Leszek is only a minor Polish lord, it chafes at Roman's sense of self-importance to be beholden to such a minor figure. Długosz tells us about the breakdown, saying, quote, Leszek the White's decision to renounce the Duchy of Kraków, as rash as it was unpremeditated, at first appears of little import. In time, however, it proves not only to diminish his reputation and influence, but also encourages his enemies and those who dislike him. Roman the Duke of Vladimir, who acquired the Duchy of Halicz thanks to the generosity of Leszek, learning that Leszek has lost the monarchy and the Principality of Kraków, and is thus left with only Sandomierz, Lublin, Mazovia, and Kujawia, begins to despise him both because of his diminished authority and his tendency to act on impulse, thus showing himself still immature, and so refuses the tribute he has till then been paying, and announces that he is neither Leszek's subject nor his vassal, but his enemy. All Poles trading in his territory are stripped of their possessions, and his own subjects are forbidden to trade with them. Roman then raids the territories of Lublin and Sandomierz, bordering his own, and loots them and puts garrisons in a number of their towns. For a while, Leszek tolerates these pinpricks, being content to send a Roman requiring him to revert to friendly relations. However, these reminders further incite Roman rather than incline him to mend his ways, so Leszek puts on the pressure. He places garrisons in a number of strategic places which rout the Ruthenians who rashly come in search of loot. End quote. This trouble eventually comes to a head in the year 1205. Długosz continues on, saying, quote, Duke Roman, no longer content with minor unofficial raids into frontier areas, declares war on Leszek and Conrad, to whom he swore fealty and obedience, and invades their territory. There are several reasons for his action. The huge wealth taken from the Rus in the years when almost the whole of the country was conquered, the disbandment and dispersion of his forces, cavalry and infantry, among many of the Polish duchies, the quarrels of the magnates, and finally, the immaturity of Leszek and Conrad. Also, the harsh reply they gave his emissaries when he asked for all the land of Lublin in compensation for the losses and costs he had incurred at the battle of the river Małgorzata, and was told that, having quit the field, he was not entitled to anything. However, before crossing the Polish frontier, Roman sends emissaries to the Bishop of Vladimir, who is of the schismatic confession, taking him gifts and asking for his blessing on his foray into Poland, which Roman intends to be one of devastation and which is to continue for 3 years. The bishop, however, declines Roman's gifts and tells his emissaries that he cannot bless Roman or his enterprise since he has previously started unjust and wicked wars and is again embarking on one that is quite unjustified, considering that the Poles have so often exposed their bodies to danger and death to defend the Ruthenians against the barbarians. Infuriated by this reply, Roman tells the bishop that he will have his head off when he returns from the war against Poland. The bishop retorts that threats do not frighten him, nor is it frightening to die for the truth. And anyway, Roman cannot be sure that he will return from his wicked war. So, At the start of spring, Roman advances into the Lublin territory, the part of Poland adjacent to Ruthenia, and lays siege to that city. Lublin has a Polish garrison and is stoutly defended, and for a whole month Roman tries without success to capture it. However, he does capture several of the wives and daughters of the Knights of Lublin, and these he keeps in an enclosure, like cattle, allowing his Ruthenians to violate them. Meanwhile, Leszek and Konrad have assembled a considerable force of knights and peasants from Sandomierz, Kujawia, and Mazovia, which is reinforced with a number of volunteers from Krakow. When this was reported by his scouts, Roman raises the siege of Lublin and penetrates deep into Poland, looting and burning. He threatens not only devastation, but eradication of the Latin Rite. Bishop Fulko, Vitus, the Bishop of Plock, and several of the nobles try to parley with him, promising to pay compensation for anything the Poles have done in breach of their alliance. Roman cunningly promises peace and sends the emissaries back, but in the meantime continues his devastation of the country. Some priests he has captured are shot at with arrows to make them divulge where Leszek is hiding. In this way, Leszek reaches the Vistula and gets his army across, partly in boats, partly by fording, and, thanks to a drought, there are a number of places where the river is so shallow as to allow this, and pitches camp outside Zawichost. When his scouts report the approach of the Poles, Roman laughs at them. Then, some soldiers confirm what the scouts have said, but Roman still does not believe them, saying that the Poles will never engage him in battle. Then, at dawn on June 19th, the feast of the martyrs Gervase and Protes, Leszek and Konrad arrive on the scene. Their army, commanded by the voivode of Mazovia, is already in battle array and ready to fight. The shooting of the Polish archers and the pressure of the Polish attack is such that, in so narrow an area, Roman is scarcely able to array even his first line. The two armies raise a clamor and engage with spears and lances poised. Although Leszek and Konrad are present, they are not allowed to take part in the fighting, but have to remain at a distance, where they await the result, torn between fear and hope. The Poles rout the Ruthenian first line, and it seems that fortune is favoring them. However, having so many knights, Roman is able to replace those who fall or are wounded. The Poles are not angry with the Ruthenians, but with their duke, who to them is a traitor, a breaker of faith, and a deserter, and they are after his blood. They surround him, where he is fighting in the front rank, identifiable by his ducal emblems. Roman, seeing those with him hewn down before his eyes, and realizing that escape is made difficult by the heaps of bodies on either side, digs his spurs into his horse, which tries to throw him, but he manages to get through the press and reach the river, and there his horse fails. Now, how is he to get across and escape? A soldier brings him an old jade, which with great difficulty does get him to the far bank, where he mingles with the throng of fleeing soldiery, only to be rounded up by the Poles and, being taken for a common soldier, cut down. A number of Roman knights and soldiers are standing on the bank of the river they have just managed to cross, watching the flight of their fellows, when the bank, ripped by the hooves of the struggling horses, is no longer able to bear their weight, and collapses. The Ruthenians are now all seeking safety in flight, which means flinging themselves into the river. Many are pulled down by the weight of their armor and drown, as do many of those who get across, when the weakened bank again gives way. Some who know how to swim or who have stout-hearted horses do get across, only to be hewn down by the Poles, who pursued the survivors all that night and the following day as far as Vladimir. Some of the fugitives stray into the forest or seek out villages, only to be killed or taken prisoner by the peasants. Only a few of that whole great army survive to tell their compatriots of that dreadful disaster. The Poles capture the Ruthenian camp and enrich themselves with loot, for they find all sorts of things there. Gold and silver vessels, clothes, horses, armor. They celebrate their famous victory in various songs that to this day are sung at festivals and pageants. Roman's body is buried in Sandomierz on the orders of Leszek and Konrad. The Ruthenians release all their prisoners, and on payment of 1,000 silver marks are allowed to exhume Roman's body and take it to Vladimir for burial. End quote. Well, that was quite a long quote, but it tells the story well. Długosz succinctly summarizes these events by saying Leszek the White's reputation has been considerably enhanced by his famous victory, which is probably an understatement. But that wasn't the only impact of this battle, the Battle of Zawichost. You see, when Roman was defeated, it left a power vacuum in Kiev. Not only did this greatly weaken the Kievan state for a long period of time in relation to Poland, but also in relation to its other neighbors. One of these neighbors? The Lithuanians. The very Lithuanians who would someday become close comrades of the Poles. But that's a way off in the future. For now, we're going to stop here. We'll pick up next week with the return of Leszek to Krakow and see how he and the rest of the Piast family and monarchy fare in this tumultuous 13th century. As always, if you like the History of Poland podcast, you can support the show on Patreon by going to patreon.com/historyofpolandpodcast. I'd like to thank everyone that already supports the show. You're all wonderful people, every one of you. If you don't have the change to spare, feel free to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you can. I read every single one. You can share the word with your friends, or if you have any, you can send me some feedback via email at historyofpolandpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening.